We can have a vehicle roll out of the showroom today with anything up to 5 radars on it, 3 on the front and 2 on the back. That's really not uncommon today now. We're, as an independent operator, we're probably the largest employer of master techs in Australia. So it will stop you, it will maintain a safe distance from the vehicle in front, but only if it's fitted, aligned and operating correctly. There's never been a more important time to repair vehicles properly.
So hello and welcome to the Motoring Chronicles. Today we're going to be talking about Advanced Driver Assistance Systems or ADAS. This is technology that is kind of ubiquitous in new cars, new vehicles today. And it's technology that is designed to make driving safer, essentially even taking some decisions out of the driver's hands to ensure that the driver is safer. This is pretty complex technology, and we're very pleased today to have Adrian Parkes from ADAS Solutions Australia, a bit of an expert in all things ADAS, to talk about the technology, the hardware, and everything that needs to be done to ensure that ADAS systems are working correctly. So Adrian, thanks very much for joining us.
No, thank you for inviting me along. I'm always happy to drop by and chat about all things ADAS.
Brilliant. So Adrian, tell us about ADAS Solutions. What products and services do you offer? Give us a bit of a background about yourself and the company.
So ADAS Solutions is still relatively young, 5 years old in January. And that last 5 years have been a pretty impressive growth, actually, quite astronomical growth. So I think it's safe to say that we're the only business in Australia that offer the, as we refer to it, the all-encompassing solution to ADAS for the industry. So the areas of the business are what I refer to as our operational side of the business, where we offer diagnosis, repair and calibration of all things ADAS to all vehicles. And we have a team of technicians and support staff in the background that are out in the field offering that service all over the country now. So we touch every state now, with the exception of the Northern Territory and Tasmania right now. Then we have our training division. So we offer ADAS training courses in collaboration with yourselves at MTAQ, MTASA, and some other partners. And we also do sort of bespoke training to industry needs, for example, to insurance assessors and people such as that. Then we have our equipment division. So we supply ADAS calibration equipment and diagnostic equipment to the industry. And finally, I guess, our support division to support all of that I've just mentioned. So our support division supports our internal staff, our external customers, our insurance customers. So they're the pillars of the business, if you like. So that all-encompassing solution to the industry, to the greater industry, on all things ADAS.
All right, so we'll come back to a bit of about what you do in a sec, but perhaps it's worth saying what actually is ADAS. So I mean, I know all of industry will understand what ADAS is, or most will, but there will be some owners, I guess, who might get into a car and go, oh, it's got a few buttons here and it keep me in lane. What's that all about? So can you explain what ADAS actually is, and in terms of like software, maybe the hardware, what it's all about physically?
Yeah, I think it's a question that I still often get asked is what is ADAS? And now what I try to do now is to summarize ADAS in one or maybe two sentences, to make it really simple if I can. And I'll often say, ADAS is basically systems and sensors on the vehicle that are designed to perceive the vehicle's surroundings. And by perceiving the vehicle's surroundings, we can then mitigate, eliminate, or what's the word I'm looking for now? Really to reduce the severity of collision or impact.
Right.
So what we're looking at there is a number of different sensors on the vehicle, and typically we have 4 sensor groups. So we have digital CMOS camera, we have radar, we have LiDAR, and we have ultrasonic. And they're the 4 sensor groups that most manufacturers are using around their vehicles today.
Right. Okay. All right. So when a vehicle comes out of the factory and is sold into the hands of customers, all those things, or the software, that everything, all that bit of the hardware, the cameras and so on, they're all working as intended. So if something is subsequently misaligned or damaged or not working correctly, this is potentially dangerous, right?
Yes, of course. I mean, let's choose one of those sensor groups, such as radar technology. You know, we can have a vehicle roll out of the showroom today with anything up to 5 radars on it, 3 on the front and 2 on the back. That's really not uncommon today now. We've seen that area of the industry grow quite considerably. And those radars are, again, like I've just said, designed to perceive the vehicle's surroundings and an emergency brake if necessary to stop the vehicle hitting something or someone or another vehicle. And if those radars are misaligned and they're not looking in the correct place, then obviously that system is going to be rendered useless, let's say.
Yeah. Okay, so is there under any circumstance where an ADAS system could work, even if if cars had a sort of minor scrape or bingle or prang? I mean, is there those circumstances? They've just got to be checked.
Exactly right. The issue that we have with ADAS, and it's quite an interesting issue, really, is the fact that this technology that we're talking about, although it's cutting edge, it's really sharp, it's designed as a safety system to autonomously emergency brake the vehicle. Unfortunately, anybody who's ever heard me in training courses that I've run before, I'll always express that although we have all this technology, it's actually quite dumb. So
Right.
a radar on the front of a vehicle is actually quite a dumb sensor. It is just a sensor.
Yeah.
So it's great at doing its job. Let me try and elaborate on that. It's great at doing its job. So it will stop you. It will maintain a safe distance from the vehicle in front, but only if it's fitted, aligned, and operating correctly. The problem with the radar, the downfall of the radar, if you like, is that it doesn't know if it's misaligned. So there's no technology within the radar, so no potentiometer, no inclinometer, no gyroscope, nothing to tell the radar which way he's pointing, if you like. So we have a radar on the front of the vehicle that's designed to look forward of the vehicle, and if that radar is damaged and has an excessive pitch angle, which basically means that it's either pointing at the floor or pointing at the sky, the radar doesn't know that he's pointing at the sky.
Yeah.
He thinks it's business as usual, and we just carry on.
Yeah.
And the problem there is potentially, as you've just described. I'm approaching a vehicle in front of me that emergency stops, and I'm not paying attention. I'm looking away, or typical these days, I'm distracted. And the radar is designed to stop me, but it can't now see the vehicle in front of me that's stopped.
Yeah.
And therefore doesn't stop me, and I then smash into the back of the vehicle, the stationary vehicle in front of me.
So the repairing and maintaining of ADAS systems, the LiDAR, radar, cameras, all that is something that, given that all vehicles, I should say, now have these systems, that anyone that has any dealings within industry or with the new vehicles should understand what ADAS means and what it means if things aren't calibrated or adjusted correctly, right?
Of course. And it is still predominantly in the collision space.
Yeah.
That's where, we're looking at vehicles typically that are less than 5 years old, en masse, that are all fitted now with this technology. And those vehicles are out on the roads, involved in collisions, find themselves at a collision repairer, and this technology needs to be repaired correctly. It needs to be tested. It needs to be calibrated. It's still not really trickled into the mainstream mechanical market yet.
Yeah.
We're still not seeing a lot of sort of a high volume of warning light on or diagnostic trouble code based vehicles presenting to the mechanical side of things. So your average service repair shop down the road is probably not going to see ADAS issues. So typically it tends to be restricted at the moment to collision repair and auto glazing and a little bit of auto electrical.
So sorry, why wouldn't a regular mechanical workshop? I had assumed that perhaps when a car is due for a regular service, that now perhaps these systems are checked would be requiring some sort of check there, but that's not the case. Is that even being mooted for something down the track?
No, I think at the moment, as we're sitting here talking to each other at the moment, if I take my Toyota in for service, it gets a 50,000 K service that, let's say, maybe a major service. It has axle oils and fuel filter and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
They might rotate and balance the wheels and scan the vehicle at the end.
Yeah.
If there are no warning lights present in the instrument cluster and there are no diagnostic trouble codes present in the scan, and I've made no complaint, then it's business as usual.
So should they be part of a regular check?
It's a bit of a loaded question.
Oh, is it?
And,
okay.
and a question that I often get asked, and I look at it from two different perspectives. I think, yes, in a perfect world, that it would be ideal or sensible even that these systems are checked on service, and at least checked and tested maybe on service. Maybe not calibrated on service as routine service, but definitely as a part of that service, checked, inspected visually, and then on a subsequent road test, checked for performance, which I would almost guarantee is not going on today.
Right.
But I've got a background with OEMs, with manufacturers, from a technical management perspective and a field management perspective. So I've got at least, I guess, an understanding of where the manufacturer is coming from with this too, and that is that the manufacturer typically wants to sell thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of vehicles, and they want to sell a fair percentage of that to the fleet market. And the fleet market have their demands as well, and that is no service or a lack of service,
right,
or low service volume, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So this is where the industry is sort of at loggerheads. I think it's safe to say that, for me, for you, and for all of our listeners and observers today, nobody really wants to service their vehicle. If we could have a vehicle that had 100,000 K service interval, we'd all jump at the chance.
Yeah.
So manufacturers are very aware that, they don't want to add items to the service to increase the service. They actually want to go the other way and remove items from the service.
Right.
So that, the service requirement is lesser and lesser as we go forward, not greater and greater.
Right.
So therefore, I think in answer to your question, in a roundabout way, I don't see ADAS becoming a part of the service anytime soon.
Okay. So a car comes in and a vehicle comes in and the ADAS system does need to be checked. Now, do the equipment that is required to just to diagnose the system? I mean, are there the scan tools that we all know? Can those be updated to be able to help with that diagnosis, or do you need new scan tools, or how's that filtered into the industry?
Yeah, it's a bit of a moving feast, really. A lot of the older scan tools now are sort of past their sell-by date and really, don't have the necessary coverage requirements for ADAS, for modern ADAS systems. So, we have some new products in the market now that do cover off ADAS very well, have ADAS coverage, have ADAS functionality within there to be able to obviously, diagnose, repair, calibrate as required. But we're also seeing now, quite uniquely in the industry as well, a real need like we've never seen before for OE or manufacturers software now. We're really heading down a rabbit hole of all of these components having a requirement to be coded and programmed and software updated. And that certainly cannot be done with the aftermarket scan tools. So, I'm not going to mention any brands, but none of them are capable of dialing through to Mercedes server in Stuttgart and pulling software out of their server, down the line for a 206 C-Class that was made 3 months ago.
Yeah.
That really is restricted to a Mercedes entry system. So we are in quite a unique scenario where the vehicles that we're working on today with ADAS are literally, 3 months to 3 years old quite commonly. If you were to walk into any of my workshops around the country, you would see that would be the trend. Most of the vehicles sitting in the workshop would be less than 3 years old.
Yeah.
And that is quite unique in the industry. We're not dealing with vehicles that are 10 years old that have been brought in by your next door neighbour and they've had that vehicle for the last 10 years and they're just in for a service and a couple of tyres and a wheel alignment.
Yeah.
These are vehicles that left the showroom can be as short as a few weeks ago.
No, that's really interesting because I'm fairly sure that I've heard you speak in the past about ADAS, and that actually this is, while we think of it, and certainly as the consumers probably think of it as brand new tech and whiz bang and fantastic, it's actually been around knocking about for quite a while, right, in certain forms.
Indeed it has. It's, where are we now, 2024?
Yeah.
So it's safe to say it's actually been around for 24 years.
Yeah.
So the first vehicle I saw with a front radar was a Mercedes S-Class back in 2000.
Right.
It's definitely been, and I often start training courses like that, with a bit of an open discussion around, what are your perceptions of ADAS, and when did ADAS first come around, and typically the answer that I get from the audience is, it's around about 2015, 2016. That was when we first saw ADAS, and really, I guess that was when we first saw ADAS start to filter down or trickle down to the masses. So, around about that sort of 2015, 2016 era, you could buy a Mazda 3 with a front radar. Yeah. And I think that's really what the general public refer to. It's like, oh, well, I had a Mazda back in those days with ADAS, so that must have been when it came out. Yeah. But actually it was out, 15 years prior to that.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm guessing that it was pretty rare. I mean, it would be just the high-end sort of vehicles that would have it, and maybe the functions and features that seem endless in today's vehicles would be restricted to just a couple of things. But
exactly
the fact is that they were around, and should industry know more about this? They should an understanding of this should be wider and better.
Of course, definitely, yes. It really has caught industry off guard.
Yeah,
it has been around for a long time, and we've really not paid attention to it. So unless you really had your finger on the pulse or your eye on the ball, and you're that kind of person that looks outside of the box and looks at what's going on around about. I guess you could be forgiven for not seeing it, not knowing it was there, not realizing that it was around so long ago and that it came so quickly, I guess.
Yeah.
And now we are, as an industry being caught out by this. So we are starting to get presented with vehicles now from the mechanical side. I left the shop yesterday and we had a vehicle from a sales yard with a warning light on, a Subaru that presented yesterday, and we've got a guy who runs a successful little car yard who's trying to sell a Subaru that's got damage to the rear end and has a warning light on for blind spot monitor. So we are starting to see it, but again, it's catching them out, and I remember yesterday talking to that guy saying, I've allocated a sum of money to repair this.
Yeah.
And the sum of money was woefully too low.
Really?
Yeah. So, and that's something else that's catching people out. This isn't a $500 repair. If it needs a new radar and it needs a bracket and it needs to be repaired, calibrated, diagnosed, that can easily stretch into thousands of dollars.
All right. Well, I guess that kind of prods me towards asking about insurance. I mean, how is that working? How does that work out? I mean, if you and added to that, actually, the liabilities and responsibilities of a mechanical workshop, an independent or a bigger paint and panel shop, or can you talk about how the insurance affects ADAS and
it's a little bit of a tsunami of types. The insurers, I think it's safe to say the insurers have also been a little bit slow to jump on board. We've been talking to insurers as a business for the last 4 or 5 years. Some of the insurers more receptive than others.
Right.
So some of the insurers were quite keen to understand early on, sort of 3-4 years ago. Some insurers are only just really trying to get their head around it now. But again, I think it's safe to say that a fair percentage of the insurers and their underwriters are simply unaware of this technology, and not just the repair requirements, but again the cost. It staggers me really when I look at how much insurance costs, and I know that there are two different sides to the story, and some people complain bitterly about their insurance costs, their vehicle insurance costs, but my view on it is that right now I don't think insurance is expensive enough.
Right.
When we can have a vehicle, like for example, let's take an example of like an old, I say old, maybe a 6, 7, 8-year-old Mercedes C-Class, like a 205 C-Class with with LED matrix headlights.
Yeah.
That has a light front end. So we've got a vehicle there with LED matrix headlights. It's got a radar behind the badge. It might even have short range radars in the bumper too, as well as ultrasonics and so on and so forth. There's a lot of technology on the front of that vehicle, and I can be driving down the road today doing 60, 70 k's an hour, and something stops in front of me and I fail to stop for some reason and run into the back of it. I in a heartbeat have just racked up $50,000 or $60,000 worth of repair.
Yeah.
Just on a light front end. When we've got headlights now that can be anywhere between sort of $8,000 and $16,000.
Yeah.
I've got a radar behind the badge that can be anywhere from $6,000 to $10,000. I've got a badge that's $1,500, $2,000 now. A grille, bumper, ultrasonics. It doesn't take long for that to rack up. And I'm talking about a vehicle now that's sort of 6, 8 years old. I'm not talking about an Audi Q8 from last year that now has a LiDAR on it that's $15,000 alone.
Yeah.
It's only going in one direction. It's getting worse.
Right.
And I think the insurers and the underwriters need to first understand that. And it's not too indifferent to EV. We're seeing a similar kind of thing. I don't want to sort of go off on a tangent, but we're seeing a very similar kind of scenario with EV now, where from what I can see from my perspective, we have a lot of insurers writing off a lot of EVs. And in my opinion, that's due to a lack of awareness and a bit of a reluctance to repair the EV because of a bit of a fear factor around that.
Yeah. Is there a suggestion there that this does or could happen in terms of the ADAS hardware?
I think, I think it'll be interesting to see the next sort of 5 to 10 years when we do get that Mazda 3, that today might be worth, I don't know, let's say $35,000, $40,000.
Sure.
And it's got all this technology on it. In 5 to 10 years' time, what's it worth then? And if it has a light front end, and what's it going to take to write that vehicle off? I think it's an interesting. I think we just got to watch this space and see how that pans out.
Yeah, wow.
Whether we see parts prices decrease considerably. I guess no one will know until we get there.
I mean, from what you're saying, though, those prices would have to fall through the floor
considerably. Exactly right, to make it viable.
Yeah. Wow. Well, let's assume that repairs and calibrations and so on can be done widely. Now, this is particularly your field, but could you explain, if you are a workshop and you're curious about moving into the ADAS space, there are requirements, I would guess, around the workshop space, what you have to have, lighting, equipment certainly, and I imagine that different OEMs have different requirements for different types of equipment and so on, and I'm sure it's endless. Mm-hmm. I'm right. You're nodding your head,
yes,
so I'm clearly on the right track here. Could you explain if you were a workshop going, oh, okay, I wonder, and I know that some have moved into that area, but if you're a workshop thinking about doing it, what sort of considerations are there?
I think the considerations are numerous. My advice would be to begin with training.
Yeah.
To get some training to start with,
Sure.
because I see too many workshops out there who've gone ahead. They've maybe read a few articles and looked at a few things and got the idea into their head, which is great, but that's just the starting point.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, rather than then seek advice and get training and build from there, they'll go out and spend $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 on equipment, only to find that potentially some of the equipment is not really what they need.
Right.
But they've been sold a package,
Yeah.
From someone. And a lot of that equipment that is in their package is superfluous. It's really not necessary.
Right.
And then, they find that I've got all this equipment now. Where's the work going to come from?
Yeah.
They think that the work is just going to come to them, and actually you've got to go out and get the work just like any other work. And then finding that when they do get the work, that they don't have the correct environment to be able to complete the work, which is the other.
Yeah.
So it is a real challenge. Start with training. Get some good quality training. Do your due diligence, as I always say, and build up your knowledge base so that you've got a really good, clear understanding of what you're looking to do.
Yeah.
And then build from there. So then look at the space requirements. We have massive varying differences from manufacturer to manufacturer. It's the wonders of the automotive industry. They all look the same. They've all got 4 wheels and 4 tires, but they're all totally different. Every manufacturer is trying to do something different to the other manufacturer. So, we can have a vehicle that needs no more than a meter or 2 in front of it for a calibration, but then we can have a vehicle that needs 6 or 8 meters in front of it for a calibration. And then we can have a vehicle that has maybe a 360 or an all-round view monitor that needs, I'm going to say, something like 15 meters by 12 meters of space to carry out that calibration. Do you have that space? Again, if I put my other hat on of a field manager, and I would say, if you've got 12 by 15 meters, put 2 hoists in there and do more services.
Yeah.
And that's a reality that you've got to try and battle with, in your head. Do I want to sit this space here idle, waiting for when a calibration turns up, or am I better suited to just put 2 more hoists in there?
Yeah.
And sort of focus on service work and let this go by, or park this for another time. It's a real challenge. It is. It's quite interesting. And when we talk about that space, the environment has to be correct. So it has to be correctly lit. It has to be, flat level floor. We can't be doing it in a dusty old car park. It has to be controlled.
Yeah.
So there are numerous different sort of facets that need to be taken into account before just diving in and going, okay, I'm going to do ADAS tomorrow.
Sure.
So it's a challenge.
So what's for businesses that don't make that investment or haven't made that investment but are in the paint and panel, for example, where it is part of what they must consider, what are they doing? Are they going to people like yourself?
Yeah, we're seeing a few adopters now who are looking at getting involved themselves.
Yeah.
Particularly from a collision space.
Sure.
The auto glazing industry is an interesting one has now, because they were some of the early adopters, because they had to calibrate forward-facing cameras in windscreens.
Yeah.
They got that sort of 6, 7, 8 years ago. So started to do it early on. So the windscreen industry is slightly different. They the majority of the windscreen industry now has invested in equipment and are doing forward-facing camera calibrations, and that's actually added another revenue stream to their business. And I think if you were to sit here talking to a windscreen business today, they'd be beaming with big smiles, because it's added this additional revenue stream. And the auto glazing industry, when we talk about calibration of forward-facing camera, it's what I refer to as a clean calibration. It's not damaged. It's a windscreen that maybe had a chip or a crack.
Yeah.
The windscreen has been taken out, a new windscreen fitted. The camera is fitted back on the windscreen in the same place pretty much that it was. And the calibration is little more than a process.
Right.
Requiring some specific hardware and software. So let's park them aside. They're sort of taken care of. Now we're looking at the collision space now that are looking at this and going, okay, shall we get involved? And again, the same scenario applies to the collision space. Do you have space? Do you have equipment? Is it worth investing in that equipment? But the other thing is with the collision space is the skill level too. So if we take an average sort of collision repair business here in Queensland today, typically we're looking at maybe 2 or 3 painters.
Yeah.
Maybe 4 or 5 panel beaters.
Yeah.
But we're not looking at an auto electrician in the business or a master tech who's capable of breaking out a wiring diagram and a multimeter and diagnosing the wiring issue to that front radar, looking at misalignment angles and diagnosing it, and then setting up correctly to do calibration. So I find that an interesting challenge too with the collision space now. I think, for the collision space to go ahead, they've got to change their model a little bit and try and attract people into their business that historically they wouldn't have attracted. Again, this is not a job for a painter, and not in the scope of most panel beaters.
Yeah.
You need somebody who can read a wiring diagram, who can use a multimeter, who can use sophisticated diagnostic software and set up hardware accordingly.
Yeah.
And effect a calibration. So
that's interesting because I assume then that for a panel repair, for a paint panel shop, that would mean investment in that technology, investment in a person
training,
and then making sure the insurance company's got to be on board with covering all of that.
Of course, and the one that you've missed there is retention.
Yes.
You've got to retain that guy then too. So if you invest all of that money in that equipment and then you invest in that person, you've got to retain him or her. You've got to keep that person in your business.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, if that person then leaves in 3 or 6 months' time, you're back to square one with $60,000 or $70,000 worth of equipment in the corner that no one can use. So that is a challenge, and that's notwithstanding the fact that New South Wales, for example, as a state and as a government, stipulate that to carry out a calibration, you have to be a fully qualified automotive technician, mechanic, or auto electrician.
Right.
So again, that again shuts out some of the collision space, and I see that potentially happening around the country too.
Okay, well that's interesting. I know that there was, because the states, there always seems to be some misalignment in the rules and regulations between states. So is that a big issue, or are they almost in concert, or are there major differences that
major differences at the moment? I think it's only New South Wales that have that regulation.
Right.
However, like I say, I do see that or feel that might be across the whole of the country in time to come.
Yeah.
And I guess in fairness, I'm going to say that I'm probably on board with that.
Right.
Because we are starting to see a few rogue operators now.
Oh, right.
Out there in the field, repairing, diagnosing, calibrating vehicles that are not skilled to do so.
Right.
Particularly, in Queensland and other states that are a bit more like the Wild West.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so I mean, you, ADAS Solutions, you have 30-something guys doing across the state?
46 techs now.
Goodness
me. So 46. We've grown to 46 techs, and as I'm sitting here talking to you, 13 sites across the country.
Yeah, yeah. So those techs, their background is all auto electrical or mechanical?
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to say that 90% of our techs are master techs.
Right.
I'm actually going to say that we're, as an independent operator, we're probably the largest employer of master techs in Australia.
Wow.
Because we take master techs out of the dealer networks from Mercedes, Volkswagen, Audi, Skoda, Porsche, Volvo. We've got master techs from all over.
Right.
So the majority are master techs, and we've got a handful of auto elects as well.
So when they come over to you and you take them on, what sort of training do they require? Because obviously they're very skilled.
Yes,
so what's the switch? What do they need to do?
Yeah, typically they're very skilled, but they're quite narrow, if that makes sense. They're very skilled in a brand.
Sure.
So if I've got an Audi master tech who's been with Audi for the last 10 years,
yeah, he's
very, very skilled.
Yeah.
In Audi. But if I present him with a Volvo or I present him with a Lexus, then I rely then that he has a good fundamental understanding, and that's why we aim for master techs, because typically they come to us with a good fundamental understanding.
Sure.
And a good sort of basic principle of diagnosis understanding. We can train the rest. So typically we'll take that master tech and we'll go, okay, you might be absolutely fabulous when it comes to Audi, but let's talk about Lexus, and let's talk about BYD, and let's talk about all these other manufacturers that you've never seen.
Yeah.
And let's talk about the differences and the nuances with these different manufacturers. And, we'll spend time then training them up to a level where, that nothing then phases them, and they've got a really good, deep understanding of ADAS across all different brands.
Yeah, yeah, okay. So Adrian, let's talk about the calibration process itself, the stuff that you do or anyone involved in this sort of scenario would do. So I know that you have your workshops, so a car can physically come to you, but there's also an option for mobile calibration. Is that right? Could you talk us through what the requirements, what can be done?
Yeah, that's correct. So we offer both scenarios really, and the scenario where our workshops are required depends on how much space the repairer has. So we'll offer a mobile calibration service per se. Now that's not, immediately people think, oh, it's a mobile calibration service on the side of the road or in a Bunnings car park or something like that. And that's not the case. We need to clarify that to start with. When we talk about a mobile calibration, what we're actually talking about is a calibration on site at the repairer's site.
Gotcha.
So a collision repairer down the road, for example. So I mean, we're sitting here at MTAQ today, and just down the road in Springwood, we have a Fortress collision repairer down there that we work quite closely with. That's absolutely huge. I don't know how many cars they turn through a week, but it's in at least double figures, if not triple figures, and they have plenty of space for us to be able to go on site and carry out calibrations. So in that instance, it makes sense for us to take equipment to site, set up, and calibrate accordingly. Their environment, they've set aside a bay or two for us to calibrate.
Ah, really?
So again, they're a forward sort of thinking business who've looked at it and gone, okay, we don't want to do it ourselves today, but it needs to be done for us. And obviously, if we're calibrating, I don't know, let's say 40 vehicles a week, we don't want to be putting them on a tow truck and sending them somewhere. Yeah. Or driving them somewhere or what have you. It's far easier if we just park them outside and call the guy who comes into site, picks up the car, drives it into the workshop, sets up his apparatus and carries out the calibration.
Yeah.
So yes, we offer a mobile service, and the majority of our work is done on a mobile basis.
Yeah.
However, where we have collision repairers that don't have the required space, the necessary environment that it's going to take for calibration, we've got the facilities around the country where we can pick that vehicle up and get it brought back to one of our centres, our calibration centres. So our calibration centres are exactly that, a calibration centre. There is nothing inside there pretty much.
Yeah.
Typically our centres have a scissor hoist and a wheel aligner so that we can carry out wheel alignment checks if necessary, and then it's just space.
Yeah.
Pure, boring, standard space.
Right.
No windows, no doors, no lights. Everything painted in a sort of a vanilla, boring beige colour. But that is a perfect scenario for environment, for calibration.
Sure. Yeah.
So that's the two sort of aspects of the business, I guess.
Okay.
On site at the repairer, if the environment permits, if they have the necessary space. If not, then we can pull the vehicle back to our centres. The other reason for our centres, I guess, is twofold. One is, let's say, for example, one of my techs turns up at Springwood down the road to a vehicle, and he has, the vehicle's had a heavy front end impact, for example. It's had a collision repair, and he has some challenges, some diagnostic challenges. Sometimes the collision repairer's site isn't really conducive to carry an in-depth diagnosis, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
When you've got a guy standing next to you welding or grinding, or
Sure.
you're in the way of somebody who wants to get in and out of the paint booth.
Yeah.
That's really not conducive to that kind of repair. So in that instance, sometimes we'll say, right, okay, we've spent an hour or so here on site. It requires deeper diagnosis. Let's get the vehicle off site into a place where we can focus on that. More like a dealer scenario.
Yeah.
Where we're out of the way. So there's another scenario where we use our centres. And finally, the final scenario we use our centres is for, as I mentioned earlier, all of these components now typically require coding, programming, and that can be quite a time-consuming and delicate process.
Yeah.
So, for example, if I'm replacing a headlight in a Mercedes that requires SCN coding, then that can take 40 or 50 minutes connected to Mercedes-Benz server back in Stuttgart, and I'm pulling data from there through my Mercedes entry scan tool and into the vehicle.
Yeah.
For that to happen, I need a good solid internet connection,
Yeah.
probably wired, not Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
So all of our centres have got Cat6 wiring throughout,
Right.
and we've invested heavily in that IT infrastructure. And in the last, particularly the last couple of years, we've spent a six-figure sum, if not more, on manufacturers' OE software to be able to carry out that coding and programming. So, that has made us a real dealer alternative, if you like, when it comes to that. So typically we'll pull those vehicles back to the centre as well. Those vehicles that require, in-depth coding and programming and diagnosis, we'll pull back to the centres where we've just got a far better environment and scenario for that to take place.
Yeah. A couple of things sort of cropped up as you were talking there in my mind. I was thinking, well, you were saying about having to have fast and reliable internet connection for some of this stuff. I mean, I don't know what the scenario would be out in regional and rural Australia, but I imagine that that's not something that you could absolutely guarantee necessarily. So I don't know. What's your thinking about what happens when
it's
5 hours away from Brisbane?
Yeah.
What do you do?
Yeah, it's a challenge, and it's the logistical challenges of Australia generally are quite interesting. And we've not really gone regional yet.
Yeah.
We've restricted ourselves to metropolitan areas, but I think the regions are the next frontier, if you like. Because. Had I been sitting here 5 or 10 years ago talking about ADAS and calibrations, and we'd have been talking about Audis and Mercedes and BMWs, and I would have been talking about the fact that, if we have let's say, for example, a Mercedes that has a front end smash, that requires a headlight and a front radar, that has to be SCN coded. And 5 years ago, that vehicle would have had to have gone back to the dealer because we didn't have the laws behind us that we do today that meant that we could access that Mercedes-Benz entry.
Of course.
Fortunately, due to the right to repair now, we do have, and we've invested heavily in that area. However, as I'm sitting here talking to you today, we're not talking about Mercedes and BMW and Audis anymore. We're talking about Nissans and Mitsubishis and Toyotas that all now require coding and programming. If I fit a new front radar on a Mitsubishi Outlander, it has to be coded and programmed using Mitsubishi's MUT software. If I fit a new camera on a Nissan, it has to be coded and programmed using Nissan's Consult 3.
Right.
So that's where we're at now. So that's where the challenge then becomes quite interesting, because we're now talking about mum and dad cars.
Yeah.
And we're talking about cars that are regional now.
Yeah.
We're talking about cars that might be in Mount Isa or in Wagga or in Albany or anywhere in these regional areas around Australia, that are going to need repair. And again, I guess that's something else that the insurance industry needs to understand and try and deal with.
Yeah.
Because, inevitably, we're either going to have to go out to these vehicles, or we're going to have to get these vehicles back to somewhere where they can be coded, programmed and calibrated. And that might not be in Mount Isa or Longreach or, wherever that might be.
Yeah.
So there's going to be a costing curve there. It's quite an interesting challenge to come.
Yeah, isn't it ever? And the other thing that I sort of thought as you were telling me was, as you rightly mentioned, there are repair shops, panel shops that do triple figure during a week vehicles, which, I mean, I don't know why it hasn't occurred to me before, but it just occurred to me as you were saying it, that this is a monster industry building up here, right? This ADAS calibrations and stuff, this is
potentially year on year the percentage
huge.
Gets greater too.
Yeah.
So when we factor that in, the volume just gets greater.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's certainly not getting lesser.
No.
It's just getting bigger.
Yeah. Okay. ADAS solutions. So just if you could just talk me through the growth of the business, because that seems to be mirroring the growth of ADAS in vehicles itself. So I know that you started just a handful of years ago in Brisbane, and now, well, talk me through what's happened.
I guess. No, is it from humble acorns to oak trees grow, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, I started the business on my own 5 years ago, January. So we're almost exactly 5 years old now. And, I started from home, from the garage at home with a vision of what we have today.
Yeah.
But I don't think even I could have perceived how quickly we would get to where we are today.
So I should just ask, I'm going to interrupt you. So your background, you've obviously, you saw the potential, or so what's your background that led you to go, yes, okay, I'm going to do this?
Yeah, I'm a mechanic, I'm a tech, and started off as a Mercedes and Porsche apprentice back in the 80s in the UK.
Right.
And I guess I consider myself fortunate enough to have worked as a tech for the first few years of my career, and then broke away into technical training and worked with a couple of manufacturers as a technical trainer and course author back in the UK. Then I sort of fell out of love with training, if you like, for a while, having done it day in, day out for a few years, and decided to change track and went into technical support and found myself in technical support as a technical specialist for Mercedes-Benz UK on the passenger car side of things. And that's really where, that was in those early 2000s where I was faced with early ADAS systems, and I found myself in Stuttgart in 2004, 2005 doing ADAS training. Okay. So that was my first indoctrination of ADAS through that Mercedes-Benz era there, if you like, working directly for them. And back in, as you already said earlier, back in those days, we were looking at a very, very small volume, very, very high cost. So we were looking at 220 S-Class, and then we started to see on 230 SL. We're talking about cars that were, in excess of £100,000, and cars where ADAS fitted to them was another 20 or 30,000 pounds. So, it wasn't a box that everyone ticked.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until we started to see ADAS being fitted to 211 E-Class, and it starts to trickle down in that range, So that was my first indoctrination into ADAS, really, and then I sort of left it behind as I left Mercedes and went to work for a couple of other manufacturers, still in tech support and field management, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Before
coming here to Australia. And when I got here to Australia, I carried on the same track, really, as a regional national manager, and found myself back with manufacturers pretty much doing the same thing that I had 20 years ago. It's okay. ADAS is back.
Yeah. Okay.
It's back full circle now. But we're working on. I'm not going to say lesser vehicles, but lower spec vehicles, and it's starting to trickle down now to the masses.
Yeah.
So that's what dragged me back into it. I saw the opportunity, I guess, is the word I use for it, and thought, okay, this is only going in one direction. And like I've said in the past, I've spent my whole career in the industry, and really not much has changed. We're still using internal combustion engines.
Yeah.
We've still got brake discs and pads and wheels and tyres and coil springs. And, essentially, when I look at the fundamentals of automotive, we're still using the same things.
Yeah.
Our manufacturing processes have got better. Things have got lighter. Things have got cheaper. Things become faster. But essentially, I've still got a spark plug.
Yeah.
Still igniting a fuel air mixture.
Yeah.
Those things haven't changed. So when you look at the industry from when I started to where we are now, we're still doing the same kind of things, with the exception of ADAS. ADAS was a relatively new thing that came into the industry. Obviously, we'd never seen cameras and radars controlling the vehicle before. So it's a completely different sort of a different technology that typically the industry doesn't understand. Doesn't understand the operation of a radar or a LiDAR, and cameras to the greater extent, and what they're actually capable of and what they're actually doing on the vehicle.
Yeah.
So anyway, I sort of digress a little bit, but that's where the business started, and we kicked off in Brisbane with the centre, with what I refer to as the first calibration centre in Australia. That kicked off in Brisbane and grew quite quickly straight away. So it went from myself and another tech, and then 4 techs and 6 techs, and the more it seemed to be, the more techs we employed, the more we needed.
Yes.
As the business grew. And our next centre to open was Adelaide. So we opened a centre in Adelaide, in just outside of Adelaide City, which same again started with 2 techs, and now as I'm sitting here talking to you, there are 6 techs and 2 admin in Adelaide. And then we just grew out from there. So, today, as I'm sitting here talking to you, we've got Brisbane, Sunshine Coast, Gold Coast. So 3 centres in Queensland. We've got Ballina, we've got Newcastle, we've got Queanbeyan, we've got Condell Park, so
Wow.
4 centres in New South Wales. And we've got 3 centres in Victoria. So we've got Geelong, we've got Footscray, and we've got Keysborough. Adelaide, as I've just mentioned, and then another couple of centres in Perth, one north and one south of the river. And as I'm sitting here talking to you now, we're looking for another centre in New South Wales, and potentially, I think, sort of first quarter or second quarter of next year, we'll probably look into the Territory and maybe look at something in Darwin. And whether or not we put something in Tasmania, I don't know. But the growth has been pretty astronomical. To the point now where, like I said earlier, we've got 46 techs now. We've got staff in the background that support those techs. We've got an admin team. The team is huge.
Yeah.
The business is a fabulous place to be really right now. So it's great.
Yeah, the appetite is strong for the services that you're offering, clearly. And on that, I mean, it's not just like you mentioned, and we've talked about before the training aspect of it. Now, I know that you have a partnership with MTA Queensland, and I believe that there might be with other associations across the country. So, tell us about that? Those training offerings. What are they?
Yeah, so we have currently 3 training courses on the shelf per se. So we have an ADAS awareness course that we run in collaboration with MTAQ and MTASA and other organisations around the country. So a 1-day awareness course, which is really aimed at non-technical people, but who need to understand. So what we're talking about there again is estimators, service advisors, insurance assessors.
Yeah.
So they need to understand what's on the vehicle in front of them and how to identify it. And they also need to understand the implications for repair, but they don't need to understand how to repair it because they're not hands-on, they're not technical. So that's the starting point, I guess. So we have a 1-day awareness course. We have a 1-day auto glazing course aimed just at the windscreen business because really all they should focus on is forward-facing camera. So we have a 1-day course for that. And then we have a 2-day technical course. And the 2-day technical course is aimed at, auto elects and future calibrators, if you like, who are out there. It's what we were talking about earlier. Do some training first. So anybody who's thinking of getting involved, I would urge to do the 2-day technical course so that you can basically get an understanding of not only what ADAS is and the fundamentals and principles of ADAS, but also how to diagnose ADAS and how to calibrate ADAS and how to handle ADAS and work on it and correctly repair it.
So at the end of these training offerings that you have, that the people shouldn't expect to be able to go and be a ADAS technician, a calibration technician, but it's a stepping stone to understanding and maybe potentially down the track.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the learning never stops. The learning curve never stops. It's a really dynamically moving space. It changes from month to month, week to week, even with some manufacturers. It's quite interesting when you look at the industry today and how quickly things change and pivot in the industry, quicker than I think I've ever seen before. And we have manufacturers, I'll use an example like Kia Hyundai, who seem to, as a group, Kia, Hyundai and Genesis seem to launch a new model every 2 or 3 months.
Yes, don't they? Yeah.
And if they're not launching a new model, they're facelifting another model.
Yeah.
And that facelift, although, when you look at it on face value, it might just look like the lights have changed.
Yeah.
The architecture changes too. It's a real challenging space to try and keep up with. So you're constantly learning and constantly sort of, pivoting and chasing information and chasing new technology.
So what about the industry, the broader industry interest in what you're doing? So I understand that, you've got partnerships and tie-ups with associations like MTQ and so on. But further than that, within actual industry stakeholders, you've got tie-ups with them too. I think it's GPC.
GPC, yeah. So GPC is for those who don't know what GPC is, Genuine Parts Company, is the parent business of Repco and Napa, and we I'm proud to say really that we attracted investment from GPC over a year ago now.
Yeah.
As they saw the future in ADAS and the need for them to be involved.
Yeah.
So it's turning out to be a great partnership as we work together to grow the business.
Yeah.
So yeah, we have investment from GPC, and we we leverage off each other's positions, if you like.
Yeah.
And that helps us in the industry. We also have good, strong relationships with many insurers, with Eagers dealer group. We work quite closely with Eagers as a dealer group. So yeah, we have strategic ties in the industry.
I mean, that's encouraging, right? Because you kind of can come away with the impression that there's a bit of burying heads in sand around ADAS. But you hearing that, I mean, obviously they might be on the bigger side, some of these firms, but at least there's some interest. Right? Okay, we know this is coming. Let's do these tie-ups and work to getting something done. So I mean, that's encouraging, right?
Oh, for sure. And I think the key goal today is awareness, and we're all on the same page there with driving awareness. And once we've driven awareness and everybody understands, then I think it's safe to say that, without digressing too much, there's never been a more important time to repair vehicles properly. Yeah. And that's literally what we're all about. It's just repairing vehicles properly, and this is a part of that.
Okay, so I guess the general takeaway from all this conversation is this is really important stuff. It's going to be more important. We're going to, in a decade, it's going to be everywhere, and all cars coming through all shops, regardless of the sectors within the industry, are going to have to understand what it is they're seeing and what to do with it. Yeah. Okay, excellent. So Adrian, ADAS Solutions, it's grown phenomenally in just a few years. Is there a part of you that looks at it and goes, holy moly, how did that happen? That went quickly.
Every day. Every day.
Yeah.
The last 5 years have been the fastest moving 5 years of my life. But again, really proud to sort of stand back and reflect on where we are today, and the people that we have in the business too. Yeah. Obviously, I don't sound cliche, but it really does revolve around the people that you have in the business, and we have an absolutely fabulous team of technical guys in the business, as well as a wonderful admin team behind them. And I guess our motto has always been to be ethical, to be accountable, and to be OE or better. And I'm happy to say that we continue to strive towards that and keep ticking those boxes.
Fantastic.
We definitely are.
Fantastic. All right. Well, that concludes our ADAS discussion, but I have two daft questions to ask you that I like to end these interviews with. So, firstly, you're obviously a car person. So what car do you currently drive? And secondly, if money were no object, what car would you have?
It's always a challenging question for somebody like myself, I guess. Having been around quite a lot of exotic brands and marques over the years, my daily drive, believe it or not, is a really boring Toyota Prado.
Right.
But here's a curveball. I have got a 1948 MGTC in the garage at home, which is quite interesting. It's way before my time, and it's quite interesting when you talk to people particularly people who know me and know what I do, and it's all about technology. Yes. And in the garage, I have something with that doesn't even have washer jets. It's got spoked wheels and tube tires. Yeah. So it's really quite interesting. So I have that at home as a bit of a toy and a bit of a sort of get rid of all the technology and learn to drive again. Yes. Kind of car.
Yeah.
Onto the subject of what would I have? That is such a I could fill 1,000 square meter workshop with different cars. I've always had a passion for older Porsches, old 911s and stuff like that. going back to the sort of 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
I've got a bit of a thing for classic old Mercs too.
I was going to say, I suspected your background there. That would be in there somewhere.
They come from that background too, from old sort of SLs and stuff like that, even up to, I've always wanted a 190E 2.3 16 valve, which is a lot of people wouldn't even know what that is. You'd probably have to Google it. But, it's back in the old DTM sort of touring car days when Mercedes were fighting with BMW's M3. So yeah, I could fill a shed full of cars given the money. But there's a lot more life to go yet.
Okay, all right. Well, look, Adrian, thank you so much for agreeing to come onto the Motoring Chronicles. I really appreciate it. Fantastic.
Thank you. Appreciate being asked to come along. Thank you.